Welcome back to Watch the Booker Man and to the continued rebuild of WCW. Now, we've done quite a bit in the last few weeks of new signings and just different things starting the B show. So this, I think, to pre-warn you, is going to be, a more settled show. No major surprises currently planned in my notes for WCW Nitro this week. But we will have to shuffle things up and think on our feet as Diamond Dallas Page is injured, and I'm thinking instead of having him wrestle through that injury, I'm just going to try and switch things up for the next couple of weeks. Of course, the next episode that you're going to see is the go-home show to Halloween Havoc 2001, so a lot's going to be happening storyline-wise on that to build into what is one of our TV specials. And there's just a couple of pieces of news that interest me here. BG James winning a championship on the independent scene. He was somebody who I thought about bringing in to begin with, and then I thought that I'd give him sort of the chance to work the indies and see how he was doing. Now, you can see from his average ratings, he's doing pretty well, and his performances as well, I'd imagine, are quite decent. A 61, for example, here, and he's won 32 of his 33 matches, probably with him being one of the most over free agents that there is. But this is where I'm interested in feedback again. Do we feel like we've maybe bypassed the likes of BG James? In the first 6 weeks, maybe if he'd have come in, he could have been a really important part of the roster, and I had in mind for him to come in and do a feud with Kanyon and his little stable. Never came to fruition, and now I'm feeling like, is there really a space for BG James on his own in this company? I know he did some entertaining stuff in TNA in 2002, or maybe it was 2003, but the point being, some of these names who were on the shortlist to begin with, I'm starting to think that actually we probably are beyond bringing them in. I mean, certain people like Adams and Clark, I really thought we'd be bringing them in because of the state of the tag team division. But if you now look, we've got the Extreme Outsiders, we've got Crowbar and Jet, we've got those two in the King's Court, we've got a decent tag team division coming together. It might not look deep and impressive to anybody else, but where we were at the start to where we are now, I do think we are slowly but surely getting the tag team division closer to where it needs to be. And it's interesting that Nova has invented a new move, of course, known for his innovation, but he was also the choice that I had to bring in. It was going to be him or Kid Cash brought in on the last episode of WCW Worldwide, and I'm still 50-50 on which way I should have gone, because I think Kid Cash maybe could have got a better introduction than that. But that's what we've done. We've got 6 more days to go through those, so I will just fill you in on any interesting news that comes through. There's no decisions awaiting a response. There's nobody who I need to bring in for the next episode of WCW Nitro, as I said. So yeah, we'll just hopefully get to the show as quickly as possible with few interruptions. Alan Funk working WWA, I really don't like, to be fair. And we have just signed him to a new contract a few weeks ago. Kind of puts him more on the chopping block to me if he's willing to work elsewhere. But I'm just going to have to deal with the fact that Alan Funk will be working elsewhere when he's not with us. It doesn't really matter, does it? And probably very, very unsurprisingly here, the WWA Inception Tour Night 1 saw a new champion crowned, and given that I did actually look into the first WWA shows when I was booking this and putting the show together, I would be interested to see. So the Funkster flew his way out to Australia and wrestled with Johnny Swinger, somebody else who we've signed to defeat Rocco Rock and Shark Boy. Interesting booking there to put Johnny Grunge and Rocco Rock on the same card but in different matches. Brian Christopher to Tanker and Konnan. Well, yeah, look at that. The WWA got us and the WWF shaking in our boots, I'm sure. Johnny Grunge injured himself in that match as well. Work to be done for WWA there, and hopefully night 2, night 3 will work out better for them, because I do think it'll be interesting to follow these other companies in a alternative post WCW world, if you know what I mean. It's been bought out by Shane McMahon, so it's not the same entity that it was. So will TNA still be born in this scenario? I believe they probably will be, but yeah, I'm not looking too much into how it's set up in the game, because I want it to just appear as it does. Maybe TNA will open and Jeff Jarrett won't be the founder, or Jerry Jarrett won't be the founder, or whoever it was. But yeah, just hopefully as we continue to see the game world develop, we will see more and more interesting things. Ring of Honor, I do expect, will come into fruition, and then that's where we will be able to look at our next generation of talent. So plenty to develop, and that's the fun of this, hopefully, and I think it will be a long-term save. I'm hoping to at least get a couple of years in, as I did with TNA on TW 2020. Now, I'm quite happy with how Juventud Guerrera has performed. He's had a couple of instances in the back. I think we're going to offer him an exclusive written. I'm going to go for a per-month deal, because I just think it's fair to do that for people who are getting on written deals. And I'm going to see if he is willing to stay for 6 months, $12,500 a month. It's a bit of a risk because we've not quite probably seen the extent of his bad personality in this game, but worst case scenario, we can release him if he does anything that's, particularly bad. So far, he's just rubbed a couple of people up the wrong way, which if you look at how our shows go when I run through them, it's not a rare thing that people rub each other up the wrong way. And we'll do the same for Psicosis. We'll go an exclusive written deal. AAA and CMLL seem to have no interest in either of these guys, so I'm just going to sign them to exclusive written deals. So we will now go into WCW Nitro. Nobody gets the night off, not even the likely jet-lagged Alan Funk. We don't want to keep going to the Mid-Atlantic, so I will go Tri-State. I'm saving for another event that I've got planned. We've got August there for Northwest. We've got July for Mid-South. So we'll go to the Mid-South. We'll pick the best option, and we are in the San Angelo Coliseum. We'll go into the booking team meeting. Look what we've got stored. Not too much stored, to be fair, so I will now I've not done this for a couple of weeks, but we'll get a creative finish, which is a safe bet with Booker T. It seems to always, I don't know if that's a thing that it is more likely to assign them to a top star or something, but that seems to be the case, that we get a lot of ideas that benefit Booker T more than anybody else. We'll do another angle idea, I think. Keep that. I don't really tend to get much use out of storyline ideas for some reason, so we'll do a character idea. We'll stick with that. That's very good. And then I will use the last, so that's good. A very useful team meeting there. And then we'll go into locker room incidents. People starting crap with a morale officer again. Lash LaRue under the wing of Curt Hennig. Can't really imagine two more different people there, but that's interesting and might be something that we develop going forward. Vic Finlay doing his job. An argument between Nick Patrick and Stacy Keibler. Don Callis and Diamond Dallas Page hanging out. Nice. Hack with a creative idea. Dusty Rhodes doing his job as the mentor of DDP. So all round a pretty positive night. We've got those two matches pre-booked. And obviously the 3-on-3 main event, which will have a replacement for Diamond Dallas Page. Now the person I have in mind is a little bit left field. To be fair, I've got two people in mind. It could be one or the other. But yeah, this is what we're working with tonight. The ever-growing WCW roster. Yeah, and I'll see you on the other side. And Nitro starts with what I think is quite probably the best angle, or we've definitely not had a match this good so far, but I think this is probably the best segment at all that we've had since the start of this save, and it's simply a promo from DDP. He comes down to the ring and tells the fans that last week after the main event, he was greeted by Shane McMahon in the back, who told him he was going to be challenging Booker T for the World Heavyweight Championship at Halloween Havoc. However, DDP went and got his ribs checked out later that night, and it wasn't good news. He is joining Dustin Rhodes on the sidelines after what that son of a bitch did to him last week, and his father, of course, before then. DDP, of course, was taken out by Kanyon, Big Van Vader, and Curt Hennig. DDP has suffered broken ribs at the hands of Curt Hennig, and is unknown if he'll be able to compete next week. As a result, Shane McMahon has changed it so that it is now Booker T versus Curt Hennig going one-on-one, and if DDP can compete, it will be a triple threat. What's worse, he is definitely not able to wrestle tonight, and given it was the match that he made last week, then he's pretty disappointed to let the fans down. Thankfully, somebody from the WCW roster stepped up to join the fight against Kanyon, Big Van Vader and Curt Hennig, and teaming with Rob Van Dam and Booker T tonight will be Billy Kidman. So it's, I think, a 5-minute promo just based on the promo ability of Diamond Dallas Page, and that gets an 88, which shows that while he's not always had the best performances throughout this save, when he's on it and when he is obviously improvising well and vibing with the crowd, he is undoubtedly one of the most important people on this roster, and that's why he is still so heavily featured. Unfortunately, he is injured, but even next week on Halloween Havoc, I might try and throw a DDP promo in there just to make the most of this. Following his announcement as he walks up the ramp, the commentators discuss the reshuffled main event for tonight's show, while promoting everything else that is set to take place on tonight's episode of WCW Nitro. However, their attention is taken away from that, as when DDP reaches the top of the ramp, he is stopped in his tracks by Bob Sapp. He's wearing his NWA t-shirt with security on the back, of course, the personal security guard of Steve Corino. DDP confronts the big man, only to be jumped from behind by Steve Corino, who hits him in the back of the skull. Steve Corino then rips the shirt off DDP's back, or maybe Bob Sapp can do that for a better visual, exposing his taped up ribs as he does this security run out before they can do too much more damage, and they pull Steve Corino away. Bob Sapp is able to encourage the sort of maybe half dozen security guards because he basically says unhand Corino and he will lead the NWA World Champion away. Bob Sapp and Steve Corino claiming another victim here. Obviously his name mentioned in the promo beforehand, and he obviously took exception to that. It's not a very good segment, but it's better than the segments have been doing in this storyline, Corino's next target, which we know to be the Rhodes family. We then get a really good cruiserweight match between Yoshihiro Tajiri and Psicosis. In 8 minutes and 24, he wins with a brainbuster designed to tell a specific story, that being of a lot of outside involvement really. Super Crazy and Juventud are both at ringside during the match. Juventud takes out Super Crazy on the outside, then looks to help Psicosis, but Shane Helms comes out, Sugar Shane, and starts brawling with Juventud Guerrera. They fight off away from ringside, leaving just Super Crazy there, and when Psicosis tries to cheat later on in the match, Super Crazy does prevent him from doing so, and then Tajiri can get the win. So you could say an assist from Super Crazy, but he was just making sure there were no shenanigans, and that is a really big win for Tajiri tonight in a very good match and 2 solid performances. Very happy to see this in the Cruiserweight division, considering it has had a slow start in this WCW rebuild. Juventud and Sugar Shane continue brawling off into the night. Super Crazy joining Yoshihiro Tajiri in the ring to stand tall. The commentators put over that next week at Halloween Havoc, it's going to be Juventud Guerrera and Sugar Shane for the Cruiserweight Championship, and they hope that things can settle down between them before later tonight, however, because Sugar Shane is due to go one-on-one with AJ Styles. Now, something in my head tells me, no, he teamed with him. I've just thought for a second then, have I booked this match before? But this is the first time that Sugar Shane and AJ have been opponents, and unfortunately losing heat to the storyline that previous match had just gained, but we're still around where I'm happy for this storyline to be in terms of heat. Jerry the King Lawler is then interviewed by Scott Hudson, and he's asked about his decision to agree to face Hack next week if Hack can defeat Brian Lawler and Sir Nelson Knight tonight. Lawler is supremely confident, saying that there is no way that Hack is going to make it out of tonight alive, never mind with his arm raised in the ring. But if by some miracle he does win that match, then Halloween Havoc is going to see Hack take his first day of wrestling school live on television. Who knows, he might even learn a hold or two in the process. Again, throwing shade at him for not being a proper wrestler in that regard. As Jerry Lawler walks away, following his very smug, condescending promo, which he did really well in with the 69, we see Juventud and Sugar Shane are now brawling in the back, the two going back and forth until Juventud misses an attempt at hitting Shane with a mop that he just grabs from the corridor, and Sugar Shane super kicks the mop into the face of Juventud, sending him down. Sugar Shane then kind of shrugs it off and walks away. It looks like, for now at least, he's got the better of Juventud Guerrera. We then see footage from after the interview that Mike Tenay held with Hugh Morrus that was aired on Saturday Night Worldwide last week, including some bonus footage of what happened after the interview ended. Didn't quite make the cut for Saturday Night Worldwide, but once Hugh Morrus had finished his damning interview, he was angrily confronted by Fit Finlay, who was on set. He was not happy with Hugh Morris's comments towards the WCW locker room. Obviously, before this recent turn of Hugh Morrus, both men had the reputation of locker room leaders, and while they were managed to be kept apart, surprisingly given they were really matching each other's anger, but they were. And upon hearing about this confrontation, and with a request from Fit Finlay, Shane McMahon made the upcoming match. So it is really just a chance to give us somebody who's not just a total jobber to face Hugh Morrus, while giving him what, as we can see here, is I was going to say solid victory, but in a really bad match. The two men don't click, which is fair enough, but Hugh Morrus does okay with a 54. I'm not too mad with that, and it's probably just people aren't that interested in Fit Finlay and they didn't click. But in 5 minutes with a moonsault, Hugh Morrus is able to pick up the victory, and after the match, Hugh Morrus is not done with Fit Finlay, and instead of going back to the top rope like he has done the last couple of weeks, I've decided to change the post-match attack, trademark of Hugh Morrus, in that he will now pick Fit Finlay up, sit behind him, unlocking a seated cross-face chicken wing, and the idea for that is that we can get the camera up close on the two men's faces, the unhinged Hugh Morrus, the pain that Fit Finlay showing, wailing out in pain, of course, and that's then contrasted with the maniacal, annoying laughter of the laughing man Hugh Morrus, and I just think being able to have that image is really strongly getting over what we're doing with the Hugh Morrus character. An absolutely irritated, twisted man, and where he goes on next week's show I think is the start of a really good new direction for Hugh Morrus, and I thought this was the best way to tee that up, and it's only when Finlay is out cold from this seated chicken wing that he does release the hold, having sent a strong message to the respected veteran and to the rest of the WCW roster. The storyline Hugh Morrus goes into next week I really think is just a match made in heaven for both him and the other people involved. In the back, Kanyon stands with Curt Hennig and Big Van Vader. They're either side of him as Kanyon introduces the group ahead of their first match together tonight as simply the Triad. He puts over the respective strengths of the three men involved, the experience, the technicality of Curt Hennig, the power and the size of Big Van Vader, and the intelligence and the forward thinking of Kanyon. Kanyon then says that DDP may have got lucky against Hennig last week, but the proof of who really stood victorious is the fact that Curt Hennig is able to wrestle tonight and will be the new World Heavyweight Champion next week, while DDP, well, he won't be. As for the replacement Billy Kidman, Kanyon laughs off the threat of the number one contender to the United States Championship and points out that last time he shared a ring with him, it ended in victory for Kanyon, and he knows that Curt Hennig can say the exact same. Curt Hennig adds that tonight a champion is going to get pinned in the main event, whether it's Rob Van Dam or Booker T, and next week another champion is getting pinned when he takes the World Heavyweight Championship from Booker T. So putting across supreme confidence again from this trio, and it's not that good of a promo, unfortunately. I think we should be okay to get the heat back up with the main event and with everything else that is coming up. Now, this advances a storyline that it shouldn't, so I'm not sure why that is the case, but Arn Anderson leads Steve Corino to the office of Shane McMahon, with Corino telling the enforcer that he thought he, of all people, would understand what he's doing. He doesn't see why he should have to go and explain it to Shane McMahon. Surely Arn could have done that and saved them all this bother, because Shane obviously doesn't get this at all. Shane McMahon tells Steve Corino that he's heard him running his mouth unchecked for weeks and weeks now. The recent actions, the attacks on various members of the roster, and it's not in-ring attacks now, it's been just sort of assaults basically. Shane has to put a stop to this. McMahon says that he invited the NWA World Heavyweight Champion to represent that organisation on WCW because he respects the history and tradition of those three letters, but it seems to him that the one person who doesn't is Steve Corino himself. Shane says that he could sit here and tell Steve Corino everything that he's doing wrong himself, but he got a call this week from somebody who, he admits, had a much better idea. Next week at Halloween Havoc, the American Dream will return, and he wants a face-to-face showdown with the King of Old School, and that's going to happen without Bob Sapp's protection. A handicap match here, and it is Hack versus Sir Nelson Knight and Prince Brian Lawler, and quite simply, Hack has a good start. It's Extreme Rules, so he's throwing chairs and hitting his opponents with a Singapore cane, but eventually the numbers is just too much. Now, he'd struggle against Sir Nelson Knight, anybody would, so then having the little buzzing Brian Lawler coming in and helping Nelson Knight, of course, it's only gonna go one way, but that's not enough. It's not just enough to beat Hack. Jerry Lawler wants to humiliate him, and he brings Tommy Dreamer out and he hands him a steel chair and demands that he puts the final nail in the coffin of Hack's one-man resistance against them. Brian Lawler holds Hack in position. Tommy Dreamer has the steel chair, but he decides enough is enough, basically. He may have gone along with a few things that Jerry the King Lawler has made him do as the jester because of that stipulation, but this is just too much. Dreamer holds up the chair, but then turns and swings it, hitting Sir Nelson Knight on the skull with a steel chair and sending him to the outside. Basically, Nelson Knight is out of the picture for the rest of this because Hack can then break free, hitting a low blow to Brian Lawler, and then the White Russian leg sweep. Hack manages to pin Brian Lawler, and it's a very short-lived alliance with Jerry Lawler for Tommy Dreamer, but he decided he could fight Hack last week in a one-on-one, but this was just too much, and having watched his court jester defy his orders, a lot of really good, it's all just chemistry, having watched his court jester defy his orders and cost the King's Court the match, a furious Jerry Lawler demands a microphone from the commentator's desk, and he tells Tommy Dreamer that he just made the biggest mistake of his life. He says, you know what, I cannot wait to fight Hack, because once he is done, he will be joining Tommy Dreamer on the unemployment line, because that's right, Jerry Lawler is firing Tommy Dreamer. Tommy Dreamer nods his head, he shrugs, he kind of expected this, but he takes a microphone and says in that case, it looks like he's got nothing to lose. Hack then puts the Singapore cane around the neck of Brian Lawler, and Jerry's unconscious son is just basically there for the taking. Dreamer says that if he hasn't got a job, then quite simply, he has no issue with going to jail. Dreamer then drags Brian Lawler out the ring, throwing him over the guardrail and carried him out of the building over his shoulder. Jerry Lawler runs down to try and stop this, but is confronted by his opponent next week. The power dynamic is completely shifted here. Jerry says this has all gone too far and begs Hack to stop Dreamer from doing whatever he has planned. Hack instead puts his cane to the throat of Jerry Lawler and says, "I'll see you next week," before jumping over the guardrail himself and heading off into the night. Whatever they're going to do to Prince Brian Lawler, well, they're going to make the King regret his recent actions. Now, this is all very average again, but it is a mid-card storyline, so I'm not too upset with those ratings. Booker T and Rob Van Dam then meet in the locker room, with Booker T asking RVD if he's seen Billy Kidman at all tonight. The two then begin discussing the main event when Billy Kidman enters the room. Kidman stops them to share a complaint that he's had with his knee all week, and he's going to go quickly get it checked out before the main event. He'll see them later though, and they can go through everything and strategize for the main event. So a very short skit there essentially, just setting up that Billy Kidman may not be 100% going into this main event match. Returning from the break, we see a panicked Jerry Lawler has now entered the office of Shane McMahon, asking him to do something about Hack and Dreamer taking his son. Nobody has any idea where they went, and his son is now in the hands of a pair of lunatics essentially. This has all gone too far, so of course, not that long ago, even 10 minutes back, Jerry Lawler was loving this, the potential of adding more insult to the injury of Hack by having Dreamer do his dirty work. All of a sudden now, he's not so on board with this war, now that his son, who he brought into this, is in severe danger. Shane points that out, essentially saying that Jerry's the one who took this to this level. They held Francine hostage for a few weeks, so he should have known what these two men were capable of. Jerry Lawler snaps at the suggestion that this is his fault. This is Shane's fault. He let these extreme outsiders run amok and basically do what they wanted in their extreme playground. He better fix it. Jerry just wants his place back at the commentary position at this point, and to forget any of this ever happened. This has not gone how he hoped. Shane says that it may be too late to pretend none of this ever happened, but if he hands over Tommy Dreamer's contract, then they can talk about maybe getting Jerry back to the commentary position. That's what Shane brought him in for in the first place, and next week can be the final time that he gets physical in a WCW ring. Shane says that this war will come to an end once and for all next week. He can guarantee that as long as Jerry promises that he too will keep out of their business. As for Brian Lawler, it seems like they've gone off premises. Jerry brought him into this mess and he's going to get him out. Now, there's a very wordy segment from me and there's a lot of text there. It's a 2-minute back and forth exchange. That's the basic outline of the segment rather than the specific verbiage, but we do gain heat back to the storyline. So another good segment, and that's not all we're going to see tonight. We then get Lance Storm and Mike Awesome coming out, with Lance saying that last week was a disgrace for so many reasons, but he's actually happy about the outcome. His face, of course, saying otherwise. This is Lance Storm. But last week, what finally happened, despite him losing, despite Mike Awesome losing, Shane McMahon showed his true colours for the world to see, and he showed himself for who he truly is, and there is a lot of answers that Lance Storm wants right now. He calls out the man in charge, who comes down to the ring and asks him what the hell he's talking about. He says that Lance seems to spend more time talking than he does wrestling these days, and given how he sends these fans to sleep, then that's not really the right way about. If they're just here to complain, then he doesn't want to hear it, so they can do what they're paid to do and wrestle. He's got a team in the back who he's sure are ready to fight tonight. Storm says that that's not going to happen. They're not going to be putting some impromptu match because Shane's trying to punish him again. He's tried that before, and Lance Storm's simply not going to let it happen. He knows that Shane is just trying to distract from the fact that he nearly laid hands on Lance Storm last week, and it took two of the other boys to stop him from doing so. Shane bought WCW and made these grand claims that things were going to be different from where he came from. but Lance Storm, getting in Shane McMahon's face, says, "You are just like your father." This hits a nerve with Shane McMahon, of course. He's just coming out of WrestleMania, where he, 6 months ago, but his last act in WWF was beating his father at WrestleMania, so still real personal issues between him and his father. And Shane says, "I am nothing like that man." Lance Storm tells Shane to keep telling himself that. They know that it's the truth, and deep down he knows that Shane does too. Lance and Mike then take the opportunity to leave the ring, very smug with what they've done. Got Shane McMahon angry again, and of course it might feel a little bit slow, this storyline, but the idea is that we're building to the point that Shane McMahon may well reach his breaking point. We saw him nearly do it last week, but if he gets physical, then chances are it's going to be Lance Storm who wants to slap the taste out of his mouth. Coming out from the back as Lance and Mike leave, Pete Gas and Rodney come out and say they've been meaning to catch up with Shane. If Team Canada aren't taking the chance to compete tonight, they will. Who was it? That tag team in the back who were ready to fight. He bets that they're not as ready to fight as Pete Gas and Rodney are. Shane kind of laughs. This cheers him up, to be fair, because it sounds like a great idea. And as he leaves, Pete Gas and Rodney soon realise that they have made a terrible, terrible mistake, as the music of the Road Warriors hit. An absolute squash match, 1 minute and 28, with the Doomsday Device, Road Warrior Animal, pinning Rodney just 7 nights before their World Tag Team Championship challenge. Unfortunately, a not good segment again. Palumbo and O'Haire, they're not quite hitting the levels that I wanted them to, despite being pretty heavily pushed. Coming out to the ring after the match, Chuck Palumbo and Sean O'Haire go face to face with their Halloween Havoc opponents and say that they've tried to take the defeat 3 weeks ago on the chin. They've tried to be respectful to the legends. They even reached out to the Road Warriors this week, but they got nothing back in return, so they've come out to make their point. They are done being deferential to the legends, and they're out here to send a message to the challengers for next week. 3 weeks ago, they got lucky, but at Halloween Havoc, instead of hearing them out, instead of hanging around to hear them out, Animal and Hawk are in no mood for that and grab the microphones from the two young men, and they fire back in their signature way. Generally, their promos don't necessarily make sense. It's just shouting and yelling and telling people what they are going to do, and that's exactly what they do to the WCW World Tag Team Champions, telling them they don't feel pain and they don't feel remorse. Next week, they're taking the titles, and what we're trying to put across here in this storyline thus far is that they're almost being overwhelmed by the larger-than-life characters of Road Warrior Animal and Road Warrior Hawk. Chuck Palumbo and Sean O'Haire kind of present themselves as being above it, of being cool, chill guys, normal guys who happen to be big, strong, and tough. But actually, this is the world of professional wrestling, and they're finding that when they come against two of these real-life superheroes in Road Warrior Animal and Road Warrior Hawk, they're essentially being overwhelmed. They're being shouted over and basically made to look like the young rookies that they are, and that's kind of what we're putting across here, in that this is going to get to Chuck and Sean, burn at the insides of their souls, and hopefully bring something else out of them next week on WCW Nitro Halloween Havoc. Returning from the break, we see Tommy Dreamer and Hack in an unknown location, but they have commandeered a WCW camera to come with them. We see Brian Lawler sat on a chair and he is terrified, he is screaming, he is begging to be let go, but Tommy Dreamer says that he has got nothing to lose. Remember, this is the man who said that he considered killing Paul Heyman on live television, so this is a man who, when he has nothing to lose, goes to a very, very dark place, and he suggests that if Jerry Lawler is watching the show, then he listens to their demands, especially if he wants his son returning in one piece. Then we sort of cut back to ringside, or maybe the backstage area even, and see a panicked Jerry Lawler coming out, and he enters the ring and takes a microphone. So we've got Jerry in the ring and these two guys now on the big screen. He begs Hack and Dreamer, this has gone too far. Let's just forget all this happened. Bring my son back, and I promise after next week there will be no more. In fact, we don't even have to do the match next week. He's just begging and pleading in any way that he possibly can. And again, Jerry's been the one in the driver's seat, in the power position of this dynamic for weeks and weeks now. So just before Halloween Havoc, we're flipping the dynamic here, as the camera then pulls back to reveal that Brian Lawler is hooked up to a car battery by his crown jewels. Now, this is something that I'm sure I've seen in like films and stuff, but it's just supposed to look a bit of a gritty segment, and we see Brian is almost in tears as Jerry begs and pleads what is it that they want from him. Now Hack says that first things first, and it seems this has already happened, that Tommy Dreamer leaves the King's Court, but he isn't leaving WCW. Jerry agrees to that. He says he'll do anything. He's already spoke to Shane McMahon. They can make that happen. He just wants this over once and for all. And Hack says in that case, then next week, it's not going to be a standard one-on-one match. It will be in Extreme Rules. Now, Jerry Lawler, seeing what these men are capable of right now, he says that he will do anything to bring an end to this. He accepts. Hack seems pretty happy with that. I kind of wish I'd done something now where it's Hack like throwing a cigarette out and it, I don't know, as if they were going to burn Brian Lawler, but maybe even that's too far. Dreamer heads to the car as if he's going to turn the engine on. The idea is he's hooked up to the battery, so I don't know how it works, but it's just a bit of a daft segment to be fair. Before he does anything, the two begin laughing. It's a fake out. They're not really going to electrocute Brian Lawler, but we see that Brian Lawler is humiliated because he has wet himself basically, so a bit childish or maybe a bit too silly, but yeah, it was just supposed to be a bit of a standalone segment that it was supposed to bring the heat up and sort of raise the stakes for Halloween Havoc, but we can see a 52 rating and losing heat, so maybe not quite. We then get an interview with Scott Hudson talking to the Natural Born Thrillers, and we're basically putting over that frustration and anger that they're feeling at being upstaged and overpowered by the Road Warriors. Scott Hudson asked Chuck Palumbo and Sean O'Haire if they are now doubting themselves for the first time ahead of the biggest challenge of their title reign so far. Next week, the World Tag Team Championships are on the line against the greatest tag team in wrestling history, the Road Warriors. So Hudson really putting up the pressure here, which causes them to snap. They do not like this, and they tell Scott that it's the Road Warriors who have no idea what they're getting themselves in for next week. 3 weeks ago, they were caught out by the Road Warriors, but lightning doesn't strike twice. That isn't going to happen because they are more prepared than they have ever been for Halloween Havoc. They wanted to go out and talk to the Road Warriors tonight, but it's on them if they weren't willing to listen. What's coming next week is going to be something that the Road Warriors have never experienced. Sure, a couple of weeks ago they may have had those doubts, but right now they are going to a darker place, a place that they haven't been taken to by anybody since WCW came back, and the Road Warriors are going to regret that. They are in for a fight next week. The Natural Born Thrillers don't feel pain, and they don't feel remorse either. And they aren't just here to beat opponents, they end careers. The two men storm off. Hopefully, again, the contrast here of them being these laid-back, chilled guys, increasingly their frustration has grown, and now we get, hopefully from them, it's all about the performance of the wrestlers at the end of the day, an intense, serious promo from them that says you're not going to want to miss this huge World Tag Team Championship match on next week's episode of WCW Nitro. We then get a decent match, probably because it's face-face, it's not as good, and it's only 5 minutes, because AJ Styles defeats Sugar Shane in 5 minutes and 6. When Sugar Shane is disqualified, AJ sort of gets his first sustained level of offense in the match. Not that he's going to pick up an upset victory, but he has a chance of picking up an upset when Juventud comes down and hits him with the Cruiserweight title, which he grabs from ringside. AJ tumbles to the outside, picking up a win over the Cruiserweight champion, but of course it's not. I think I did put keep strong for Sugar Shane because it's not in any way that he's been bettered by AJ Styles. It's literally Juventud Guerrera coming and screwing the match over, and after the match, having hit AJ with the belt and sending him to the outside, he takes over where AJ left off, mounting Sugar Shane in the ring and laying a few shots into him. Guerrera then grabs the Cruiserweight Championship that he drops on the canvas and knocks out Sugar Shane and lays him out essentially. Juventud Guerrera then stands tall, raising the title in the air. So Sugar Shane got the better of him earlier, but Juventud is the one standing tall and holding the belt. Now obviously that's usually a bad omen for a challenger, but we'll see how that goes next week in the Cruiserweight Championship match, and I'm happy with the rating of that segment and how this storyline has gone overall. It does give us a bit more heat into the Cruiserweight division, which had just been very match heavy in the first few months of the save. To that point, Lucha Real, who if you remember maybe episode 3 or 4, I was like on the fence about bringing them in at all and feeling like we needed to move away from that. But I think in the gimmick that they're in the act that they're in currently, they've worked really well. RVD and Booker T are walking out of the locker room. Billy Kidman approaches them. I think it's supposed to say they were approached by Billy Kidman. He has a grimace on his face, and RVD asked Billy where he's been. They were supposed to be running through some stuff with him. The main event's next. Billy Kidman says that he's just had some really bad news, actually. He's not going to be able to compete tonight. Booker says why they just find this out now. It's like 40 minutes ago that he went to the doctors, but Billy says that he's really sorry. He did everything he could, but he needs to be fit for next week's United States Championship match, and he can't risk aggravating his injury and not being able to compete. RVD and Booker are really not happy with this. They're both in action next week. They've both been through a hell of a lot in recent weeks, so they kind of see it as a bit of a cop-out from Billy Kidman, but essentially there's nothing they can do. They walk off as we go into a final commercial break for the show, or maybe the second last, I don't know, but we go into a break and come back where Booker T and Rob Van Dam are in a serious conversation with Shane McMahon following Billy Kidman's last minute dropout. Shane is sympathetic with the duo but doesn't really have a solution for them. The main event has to go ahead and it may have to be a handicap match. Both of them are going to be defending the titles next week, obviously. Booker against Curt Hennig and Rob Van Dam against Billy Kidman, so this is really far from ideal as the two men go to walk off. Crowbar bursts onto the scene. I just want to say before we go into that, at some point during the night, because of the attack from Steve Corino on DDP before, we have it confirmed by the commentators that it will be Booker T v Curt Hennig, and there is no chance that DDP's in next week's main event. Crowbar says that he was taken out by Kanyon and his boys last week. He tried to humiliate him. If they need a third man, he doesn't care if there's no time to prepare. He's willing to replace Billy Kidman. Booker looks a little bit unsure, but turns to RVD, who kind of shrugs. It's better than no one. I know that's a bit insulting and he doesn't say that, but that's essentially the idea that we're putting across. Shane says if they're willing to accept him as their partner, he's willing to make him the third man, and Booker T does agree, giving a bit of a pep talk to Crowbar, and he's sort of coming round to it. It's a huge opportunity for him, and he says, you know what, nobody's been screwed by Kanyon more than you have, so let's go and do this. Let's beat the crap out of him and his boys. And again, surprising to see Crowbar in a main event of Nitro 6 months in. I wouldn't have predicted it, but there we go. And we go into a really good main event. Very, very happy with that, actually. And we get to the point where it's just chaos at ringside. Big Van Vader, Curt Hennig, Booker T and RVD have sort of cancelled each other out, and at some point the referee gets taken down, a ref bump. We then leave Kanyon and Crowbar, and you'd think this would be easy for Kanyon, but Crowbar, the underdog, manages to take control, and he has Kanyon right where he wants him, to the point where Kanyon is begging and pleading, please no more. It looks like Canyon's going to get the job done when Jet comes out from the back and hands Crowbar a crowbar. The referee's out. This isn't their chance to just take out their frustration on Kanyon. However, Jet then turns on Crowbar, hitting him with a low blow. He then grabs the crowbar himself, puts it in the mouth of Crowbar to pick him back up. Kanyon can hit the flatliner for the 1, 2, 3, and Jet has officially turned. A shock moment there with two people who've been completely irrelevant, to be fair, but that is the big moment in the main event of Nitro. You could see it as being sort of dragging two nobodies into the main event storyline, but at the same time, I do think it also boosts them and gives the Triad, who I've not actually set up in the game. I'm going to go back and set up this stable because it's a little bit daft that I've just done their first match and now they won't be named the Triad. It's going to be another one of those things in the show history that's going to really, really, really annoy me, but it is what it is. They're a faction, I would say, formed the 24th of the 10th. It's not actually that, is it? It was I believe the 10th that they formed. Yeah, simple as that. We'll add to that stable. I do think I have a logo set up for him, but I've just not saved it. And after the match, Jet returns to the ring. Canyon's pinfall victory over his now former partner. He joins his mentor and embraces him with a hug. Big Van Vader and Curt Hennig eventually join them back in the ring. The Triad and Jet standing tall. Bit weird we've named them the Triad with having three members and then added Jet to them right after, but it is going to be the three men as the Triad, and then Jet's going to be essentially their young boy. But the commentators sign off the show. Next week, every championship in the company is on the line. The Road Warriors versus the Natural Born Thrillers, the biggest tag team title match we've done so far. Sugar Shane versus Juventud Guerrera is going to be massive. We've got the United States Championship match between a well-rested up Billy Kidman and the champion Rob Van Dam, and then we've got that man Curt Hennig against Booker T. Also, in non-championship action, Hack will face Jerry the King Lawler, the final showdown of their rivalry, and as well as that, Steve Corino will go face-to-face in the middle of the ring. That's a talking segment, not a match, with the American Dream Dusty Rhodes. That is the best show that we've put on so far by some distance, and I'm going to be honest, I think if you look at what happened on the show, it's probably at best average. It's certainly not the best show that we've put on in terms of the booking, but that promo from Diamond Dallas Page and what was apparently a good star power filled main event, So yeah, it is what it is. I don't know how a quiet Shannon Moore and a relaxed Elite Skipper have got into a heated argument, but it wouldn't be a show without a major issue, would it, behind the scenes? So it is what it is. I'm not too bothered now. We will now go into WCW Saturday night for this week, and I'll just show you the people who haven't been used, just so you've got an idea of who is going to be in action, or at least used in some capacity on Worldwide. Again, it's not the strongest roster, so I'm going to go through it pretty quickly, but I think we've got a decent show planned out for this one as well. So I'll see you on the other side. So just to show you who is not used on tonight's show, it's Dusty and Dustin Rhodes, who were both written out with injury, and Chavo Guerrero, who can work but is injured. I thought about putting a little segment in there with him. It's only just occurred to me now when I've seen him not used that I've forgot to do that, but I just think it's okay to have him off screen for a couple of weeks. It was just going to be a 1 minute promo where he complained about some stuff, so I'm not that bothered. We also see Reno slightly overused on the show, but otherwise no issues. So I'm going to get into WCW Saturday night, which begins with a very bad segment. Jimmy Hart that is, in his office giving a pep talk to Diamond and Swinger, who will face the Young Dragons tonight, and Christopher Daniels, who will face Buff Bagwell tonight, a big name for him in his first match. He tells them that tonight is a huge opportunity for them, but remember, Jimmy brought them to this show for a reason. Go out and show the world what you're made of. The opening match sees Steve Corino squash Lash LaRue, losing all momentum from Lash LaRue's victory over Kiwi last week, but we just wanted Steve Corino in another good match, and then he gets the chance to cut a fairly long promo, which is really bad. I'm hoping to very soon see improvements from Steve Corino here, and I think that having Dawn Marie on screen rated on her sex appeal and Bob Sapp rated on his intimidation does bring down Steve Corino's segment. So you could argue, do we rethink this group? Because the way angles are rated, I think it probably gives too much weight on Dawn Marie and Bob Sapp being there, when it should just be about how good Steve Corino is at cutting a promo. Of course, they won't be there next week, as Steve Corino talks about his showdown with the American Dream next week on WCW Nitro Halloween Havoc. Dusty knows better than anybody what the king of old school is capable of, and he hopes that he's wised up his son to what he can do to him. Basically, next week he is more than happy to come alone, but warns Dusty to be careful what he says for him. He's not just going to go easy on him because he's an old man, and the idea here is to just build up a big showdown. It's going to be a war of words between these two guys, and almost saying we're not expecting everybody to know the history between Dusty Rhodes and Steve Corino, but we've told them that it's there, and then next week is going to be what fills in all the gaps for people who aren't familiar with their ECW rivalry. I'm going to have to do a bit of research myself because I've seen the matches and I've seen a few segments between them, but I just want to get the full picture before I do that Halloween Havoc segment. The Young Dragons are found out cold in the back. They're due to be in action next. We then get an interview from Johnny the Bull and Vito Lagrasso. Reno is not there, but Vito insists that they are all on the same page, and the one thing that they certainly agree on is getting revenge on Sanders, Jindrak and Stasiak tonight, and it's going to be those three against those three. Now, conspicuous by his absence, despite the claims that by Vito that they're on the same page, is Reno, but actually you saw that slightly overused note. It just said overused because I did have Reno on screen here, but I took him off just so that it doesn't affect him quite as much, and it slightly changes the dynamic of the storyline because now there is that question, are these people truly on the same page? But that actually plays into the booking of the main event, so I'm quite glad that I had to do that because it adds a little wrinkle that I wouldn't thought to do myself. We then get it's not actually that bad, I was going to say bad match, but it's just that they're not people who the fans are interested in. It's still okay, the wrestling's pretty good, the performances are pretty good, and because Hayashi and Yang aren't 100%, they are defeated by Diamond and Swinger in 6 minutes and 7 seconds, and Swinger and Diamond celebrate a debut victory, and we did this really to keep Jimmy Yang and Kaz Hayashi strong, but also to continue their rivalry with Pete Gas and Rodney, who just come out and laugh at the Young Dragons who are down. Swinger and Diamond don't really care how they won as long as they won, and it's just keeping things ticking over there. Elite Skipper and Kid Romeo sit down with Mike Tenay, and he's asking them about their experience in wrestling the Road Warriors and the Natural Born Thrillers recently, as well as being the victim of an attack from the Natural Born Thrillers. They say, sure, it's going to be a wild match next week, Halloween Havoc, for really tough sons of bitches, but they're not here to talk about anybody else. They're sick and tired of being overlooked. This has been a sort of common theme for them in recent weeks, and they're going to make themselves known in a big way very, very soon. I do actually have a plan for Elite Skipper and Kid Romeo, but it relies on something else which hasn't yet happened, so yeah, we'll get to that. Pete Gas and Rodney are seen getting to the back and they're laughing about what they did to the Young Dragons. They're confronted by 3 Count, who we flew out to the San Angelo Coliseum for about a 30-second skit where they call Pete Gas and Rodney assholes. Anybody couldn't have done that because everybody knows that's the case, but we wanted to use people. Buff Bagwell faces Christopher Daniels and defeats him in 6 minutes and 23 with a blockbuster, but we do get the idea that Daniels takes Buff Bagwell a little bit further than you might hope, or he might have hoped, Buff Bagwell that is, and when it looks like Daniels might actually be taking control of the match, Cash comes out and basically pulls at his leg or grabs at him or does something that takes his eye off the ball, and that means Buff Bagwell can win with a blockbuster. But look at the performance there. I don't know what we said. I think it was a storytelling match. So when it comes to that, Buff Bagwell not doing particularly well in ring, to be fair, considering I've got quite a big idea for him, but Daniels with a 51 when he has such little overness is really good to see. And Buff Bagwell though debuting a new power spot that will help him in future, so that's a good thing. Cash continues a brutal beatdown on Christopher Daniels after the match, of course already establishing this man has a real chip on his shoulder. He then cuts a fired up promo saying that he's not gonna wait round, he's not gonna be punished by Jimmy Hart for daring to speak out against him. He wants a big name for his debut too. Daniels gets Buff Bagwell. He wants Jimmy Hart to bring somebody that impressive to worldwide. Jimmy Hart says that is quite simply enough and he demands Cash stops, but tells him he will get his opponent next week and he best be careful what he wishes for. So again, just trying to establish some character with these newcomers so that it's not just looking like a case of bringing in a bunch of generic new guys and not having anything for them. Mike Sanders with the Peaks of Perfection responds to the words of Vito earlier, saying that he doesn't buy for a second that those guys are on the same page, and even if they were, they have a confirmed traitor in their ranks in Reno who basically proved himself a turncoat the other week, so he knows that they're not really on the same page as much as the family try to present that they are. This week is going to end like last week, the 3 guys who you see on screen standing tall. We then get a segment in the ring called Kwee-Wee's Couch. It's a bad talk show segment that is designed to just get some people who don't matter on screen, and it's going to be something I probably do a few times with Kwee-Wee. They take the time to criticise the newcomers to the company, namely AJ Styles, who they call out. He comes out, and this is a chance to basically bully and mock the young newcomer, but David Flair of all people comes out and backs AJ Styles up. The segment ends in a brawl, which the faces get the better of. Worldwide, to be fair, will have plenty of poor segments. Speaking of which, this video package promoting Halloween Havoc next week isn't much better. It says advances a storyline, so that means our main event storyline is either already really, really bad, that a 47 doesn't affect it, or it was too short of a segment or whatever to have too much of an impact. But I just put our champions on screen because all of them will be defending their titles at Halloween Havoc. As the commentators turn attention to promoting our main event, we see the competitors spill out from the back. They've already started fighting, such is the hatred between them, and once the brawl sort of reaches the ring, or at least 2 guys are in the ring, the ref rings the bell and we are underway. Now it starts, that is a terrible match. Wild brawl. That's my fault then on the booking. I should have just left it regular. That is really bad. 2 guys really off the game. I mean, all these guys aren't very good wrestlers, are they? So it is what it is, but that's what Worldwide is for. Essentially, the idea is just, like I say, a wild brawl, completely out of control, but eventually Vito and Reno, of course, Vito's been the peacekeeper, bringing Reno and Johnny back on the same page, etc. But actually, the attitude of Reno, as much as he's tried, he really doesn't get along with his brother, as we know, and when they start arguing, Mike Sanders pushes Reno into Vito, knocking him off the apron, and then Sanders can roll Reno up, and a much-needed victory for Sanders and the Peaks of Perfection, but also advancing the storyline, because despite being the one who's been here to make peace, he came back on the orders of the guy who's sending the instructions to the 3 men in the ring. Vito can't get over what was said between him and Reno during the match, and it's that thing again of they're trying to do things professionally, but there's just that brotherly hatred between them, the old wounds. It doesn't take much to pick at them, and it all comes back to the surface again. Johnny the Bull is pushed away by Reno as he tries to play peacekeeper this time, and he leaves the ring. He grabs Vito's jacket and sort of signals to Vito, just leave it, don't get into the argument, let's just go. But when he has Vito's jacket, he hears the phone ringing. He takes out Vito's cell phone and kind of chatting to him on the outside, and then takes a microphone from ringside. He says, stop, stop, stop. The big man has seen enough. He's pissed off that these 3 guys can't seem to get on the same page. So he's coming next week. This instantly stops the argument, with Reno and Vito shocked by the revelation that whoever this big man is, the man in charge of these 3 Italian Americans, well, he's heard enough, he's seen enough of their bickering, and he will be here next week. I'm saying this as if it's this big, great, huge segment we've all got to look forward to, while showing you a 38 rated show on screen. Absolutely terrible. We're making profit still, gaining popularity, so really, really happy to see that. Positive for every single region apart from Puerto Rico, which I assume we don't air in, and actually gaining numbers for a change rather than losing numbers. So really, really happy with that. Fans amazed by Buff Bagwell. What a great job I've done of rehabbing this guy, because, well, it reflects a lot of the things that are said in the comments, to be fair. A lot of people like Buff Bagwell, and I think it's fair to say we need to accelerate his storyline now. He's got his new spot, an absolutely terrible episode of Worldwide. Crazy for me to say this, but Buff Bagwell deserves better. Good, really good rating actually for WCW Nitro. I feel like the ratings are kind of based on how good the show is, which doesn't make sense because you only know how good the show is in retrospect. But that's our best episode of Nitro yet. I thought it was not that good, if I'm being totally honest. The main event match was our 15th best match, and it's literally a 1-segment show, to be honest. The fact that DDP came out and cut an 88 rated promo to start the show basically made this from an average episode up to being a great episode. So yeah, it is what it is, but I will see how our... So yeah, we've actually not done as badly as I thought. Sure, those 2 major regions have lost a lot, but overall, we're probably a bigger promotion than when we started. Are we still classed as the 2nd biggest in the world? We are 3rd biggest after New Japan, so I'm completely fine with that. Actually, I like that there is still room for us to grow, and I think it was a good episode. We've got one person I do need to sign actually before we close out the episode. I think he's on the shortlist, he is, and we are going to make a 1-year exclusive written offer to the big man, and there's an opinion that I'd actually like to get here. Do we call him Little Guido, or do we go with the joke name and call him Big Guido, considering that he is in charge of this Italian family? Whatever we decide to do doesn't really matter. Have I made that offer to him yet? Make offer. We're going to have to pay Little Guido's travel, but I think it's going to be funny to see him in charge of those 3. And I think that is everything we need to do for this week's show, other than change next week's episode of WCW Nitro to have a colon and be called Halloween Havoc. Hopefully you've enjoyed this week's show. Again, it's been a relatively uneventful episode. I can say this now. I'm not going to criticise my own booking too much, but I'm just seeing, I've seen it a few times in comments, and I do agree, to be fair, that things just need to be moving a little bit more. We've got quite a bit of morale issues as well, so a lot to work on as we go into the months of November and December, the 2 most important months in our build, with Starrcade being on the final day of 2001. I'm hoping that we'll be making money this month, but if not, it is what it is. We've still got over 5 million in the bank, and most importantly, Halloween Havoc is a huge show coming next week, so I hope very much that you'll join me for that. 4 championships on the line, and I think I've said this a few times, but after it, we are really going into the build to Starrcade 2001, the last 2 months, so hopefully you'll be interested in what's to come at Halloween Havoc, and I'll see you next time. Cheers.